right, everybody, welcome back to another video from Tops Knives. This is for another Work Sharp product. We've got a lot of them and we want to show you guys different ways of sharpening our knives. This is one of the most common questions that we get through emails and phone calls and all the time is, you know, what should I use to sharpen my knife? And so we've done a couple of videos in this series, if you will. This one shows another sharpener that Work Sharp offers that is actually pretty cool. A lot of times with sharpeners, you're moving the knife across the sharpener. In this case, you're gonna be moving the sharpener across the knife. So a little different technique, but it's a pretty cool setup, and the price is not bad at all either. For this, the Work Sharp Precision Adjust is, I believe the MSRP is like 60 bucks. And you can do quite a bit of stuff with this thing. First things first, we're gonna show you how to set this up. It's super simple. It comes with a base. It comes with your actual, the piece that holds your sharpener and lets you adjust your angle. It comes with a clamp for the knife that you're actually gonna, that's where you put your knife. And then it comes with the sharpener, the actual sharpening piece. And we'll get more into this. It's 3 different grits. We'll get more into that once we get this set up. But just to show you how simple this is to set up, today we're gonna be working with a Tex Creek, which is one of our better kind of all-around camp hunting knives. It's about a 4 to 4.5 inch blade and 3/16 of an inch thick. So here's how easy this is to set up. You got your base, you take your little sharpening module piece. It clicks in super simple. Before you put the knife, before you put the clamp into the piece, you basically are gonna put the knife into this clamp. And usually what you wanna try to do is set the clamp so it's about halfway down the edge. That will give you a more consistent sharpening across the piece. If you set it too close to one side or the other, your angle might actually change slightly as you get from one end of the knife to the other. So you make sure that that's nice and tight. It's just a little turn knob to tighten it down onto that clamp. And then it is, I'm gonna flip this around. It's basically a magnet that just slides into place. When you're ready to sharpen it, you take your little sharpening piece. It goes into a little hole there, and it's magnetized, so it just pops into place. And once it's in place, you're ready to go. Like, that's one of the things that I like the most about this, is how simple it is to set up. So this I think would be great in your home, in a garage, in a shop, you know, in a den, wherever you like to sharpen your knives. That would be easy. This is also small enough to take camping. I could easily see people just carrying one of these around in their truck, in their trailer, with their camping gear. It's not something that you're gonna wanna go hiking with. You know, it's not tiny by any means. So I wouldn't throw this in a backpack and go 3 miles in or something. But around a campsite, in your home, in your shop, garage, whatever, definitely, this is great for that. So a couple of the features on this thing. You can adjust your angle using this knob right here. On the left-hand side, there's a gauge guide that goes from 15 to 30 degrees. And on the right-hand side of this, you can get into the single degree changes. So most of our knives are set to 25 degrees. What I'm gonna do for this Tex Creek to start is I'm gonna adjust it to 25 degrees. I'm gonna put it right on that and run the Coarse Grit over that edge a few times, and just make sure that it's lining up. Because our edges are sharpened by hand, they might vary by a degree or two. If it doesn't look like it's quite right, I'll start adjusting either 26 or 24 until it looks like I'm kind of matched up to the angle that's already on it, and then we're just gonna go. So the sharpener, like I said, it's got 3 grits. It comes with this piece already set up. 320 is your Coarse Grit. You basically flip it and it clicks back into place. You get up to 600 grit, and then you can finish with a ceramic stone. So this will, in a sense, hone the edge once you get the edge pretty good. So this knife's been beat up a little bit. The graphics team here, the media guys, they went out and go figure, they beat this on a car for a while to try to just make sure that this edge wasn't super sharp, and I can tell you that they did an okay job. So we're gonna start with the coarse grit. One thing that I like to do personally is I don't like to let my edges get to the point where they're totally dull. If you can avoid that and just touch it up every now and then, you can go from 600 to the ceramic. If you like to touch it up even more often, you can just hone it basically on that ceramic piece, and that's it. That's all you'd ever have to do, as long as you keep it pretty consistent. So that just depends on how much use your knives get. So we've got this set to 25 degrees. We're on our 320 grit diamond plate, and the way that WorkSharp recommends using this particular item is not just running it in one single stroke across. They recommend strokes up and down as you move along the edge. So that's what they recommend. I find that to be probably the best way to do this, because you're creating lines that go opposite the edge, and that's going to give you a more consistent edge when you're finished sharpening the piece. I'm going to run that maybe once or twice more just to see if we got the angle pretty good. So I think that we're pretty darn close on that angle. Now, one thing that I will say, it's not really, it works, it's not really that big of a deal, but one thing to be aware of, you cannot be pushing down hard with this as you're sharpening the knife. If you're using this piece and you're putting a lot of downward force, there is some play in this mechanism that holds the knife in place. There's a little bit of play up and down, and the more pressure you put, you can kind of see that push. That's gonna change your angle on your knife, and you might not get it quite as sharp as you would. So let the stone do the work. Don't push down on it. I try to keep a pretty light pressure, and I'm trying more to grind off the edge rather than push through it. That's I don't know how else to explain that, but the point is, don't put a lot of downward force as you're trying to sharpen this. So the angle to me looks pretty good. The recommendation from WorkSharp, depending on how dull this is to do about 8 to 10 passes on each side of the knife. So after you've done your 8 to 10 passes, to switch this knife around so that you can sharpen the other side is super simple. There's two options. One, you can just pull this whole piece off, flip it around, put it back in. Or two, there's a button on the back of this that basically pushes that forward a little bit, and then it'll rotate and click back into place once it gets around. So either way works, depending on how big your knife is. Sometimes it might be easier to pull it off and flip it around. If this were a much longer knife, that tip would be hitting the table as I'm trying to switch it. That might not be ideal. So, but that's really it. That's how simple this thing is. The other thing to note, because of the way this is set up, this is not going to be a convex edge like the Ken Onion WorkSharp would be, or a lot of the powered machines that WorkSharp makes. They have a little bit of give on the belts, and so you get a convex edge. This is going to be a flat edge. So depending on what your preference is, keep that in mind as well. You're not really getting a convex edge out of this. So that's 3. We're going to do about 8 and then switch it. I think we got probably 1 or 2 more, and then I'll switch sides. One other thing that I do want to say, when you get to the tip, a lot of people mess up their tips when they sharpen their knives. depending on what you're using to sharpen your knife, there's ways to avoid that really easily. With this piece, with this tool, for example, as you're moving down and you get to the end of the knife, you don't want to go all the way off the end, because what'll happen is you're going to slip off the end, and that is what will roll your tip and kind of like blunt it, and you're not going to have that nice point that the knife had to begin with. So when you get to the end, your last stroke should be about halfway off of that tip, and that's where you should stop. If you keep going, you can kind of see as that starts to roll, all that's going to do is blunt your tip. And so to keep a good tip on your knife, when you get to the end of it, stop about halfway over the edge of that tip and then come back. That will keep your tip the same as the factory profile. It'll help keep a nice pointy, sharp tip on your knives. It's super, super common for people that are learning to sharpen their own knives to mess up their tips, and that is how you would do it with this tool, is just to keep going all the way off the end. So one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so that was about 8 or 9 passes. Basically what you should be looking for is on the bottom of this knife, you should be able to feel across that edge, and you should be able to feel a burr. Basically, you should feel the metal catching on your skin. And if it's not catching on your skin all the way across the edge, then you probably need to do a few more passes, or maybe you've got your angle wrong and you're gonna need to do a lot more passes, because now you've got to reprofile it. But point is, you should have a burr developing, and on this blade, I can feel it for most of the kind of the flat part of the edge here, but as we get around towards the tip, I'm not feeling it as much, and there is a bit of a chip on the end here, so we're gonna have to work that a little bit more to try to get rid of that. Another thing to mention, just for those who might be wondering, like he said that only the round part here is not getting the burr. Why isn't he just sharpening that? If I just did that, the rest of this edge wouldn't be even anymore, and that's gonna be a problem. So even if there's only one section of your blade that's kind of a problem area, you still have to continue to sharpen the whole thing. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with one spot that has more wear than the other. It's not gonna sharpen evenly. That's a no-no. You're not gonna wanna deal with that. So, one other thing to mention, WorkSharp has a newer version of this tool. It's basically called the Precision Adjust Elite. What's cool about that one is you get a carrying case, which would make it even easier to throw it in a truck or in a camper, and it comes with extra abrasives. So this has 320, 600, and a ceramic. That one has 3 of these pieces, and the first one is 220, 320, and 400. The second one is 600, 800, and the ceramic, and then the third piece is a strop that also has a little piece of ceramic for sharpening serrations. So it comes with a whole bunch of extras to be able to get, even a finer edge on it. The other thing that's cool for is, for example, this knife, where these guys beat it up, there's a bit of a chip on the edge here. If I had that 220 grit right now, that's what I would be using, because it's gonna take a lot longer with the 320 to kind of work that chip out of the edge of this knife. Is it that big of a deal? No, because it'll still happen, it's just gonna take longer. But if it was, if I could switch to a 220, we'd be able to get through that a lot faster and be ready to just start honing. So one thing to note, if your edge is a little more beat up, the Elite version of this sharpener is actually a pretty cool setup to be able to take care of edges that are more damaged and then get an even finer edge than this one will supply. So. All right, so we've been going at this for a little while. Basically, we do have a burr along the entire edge that we had for a while. What I've been trying to do is get rid of this chip that's on the edge. So it's just another good reason, if you can afford it, to upgrade to the Elite version. I would definitely rather be using the 220 grit to try to get rid of this chip. The other thing is, again, where these are sharpened by hand, the further I got into this, the more I realized the factory edge on this was probably more like 23 degrees, and we might have been able to save a little bit of time building up the burr and maybe even getting some of that chip out if we had matched that angle perfectly from the get-go. That's not that big of a deal, and the longer you own your knife and use the same angle to resharpen it every time with this tool, the easier it will get every time you sharpen it. So just a couple of things to note. And now we're gonna start switching to the other side. So once you switch to the other side, it's the same thing. We've got a burr on this side. We're gonna try to move it to the other side. Once we do, we'll switch from the 320 to the 600, do the same process again, and then switch to the ceramic, and then we should have a blade that is pretty dang sharp. So here we go. One thing that's important to note is, so you want to try to make sure that your edge is as close to even on each side as possible. So because we ran a lot of extra passes on the one side trying to get that chip out, I'm going to try to do about as many passes on this side, and then we'll try to go back to a smaller number of passes per side, but that should be pretty easy to do once we have this even or close to even. So that's what we got going on here. It's going to be multiple passes on this side, more than the 8 to 10, but again, that's because we're trying to get rid of this chip on the edge. So, and we are reprofiling this edge to an extent. Okay, so this took longer than your normal knife sharpening will probably take because this knife was pretty beat up, and it had a little bit of a chip up near the tip. Now by working a little bit longer, more than the 8 to 10 strokes that are recommended, I did that about 3-4 times on each side. That chip is barely there. It's mainly gone. If we had the rougher grit sharpener, I think we'd be completely done with that. But I'm gonna say that this is close enough and barely there, enough that we're gonna now switch to the 600 grit, basically do the same process. I'm probably gonna do it a couple of times just to make sure that that chip is as small as possible and to smooth this out. Now, one thing again to note that is, if you were putting a lot of pressure when you were using this 320 grit sharpener, you're gonna have a really toothy edge, and you're gonna have to spend a lot of time with the 600 grit to get rid of those little tiny serrations that get made. If you kept pretty light pressure, then once you switch to the 600 grit, for the most part, you should be able to just do it a couple of times on each side, maybe 3 times on each side, and then you'd be ready to switch right to the ceramic. So we'll probably have to go a little bit further with the 600 just because we did so many passes with the 320. But again, it's just another reason not to overdo it with the pressure. You gotta let the tool do the work, not your weight. So, switch back to our starting side. And we are on 600 grit, and we're gonna do the same thing we've been doing. So the process doesn't change, it's just a different grit. It's gonna be a little bit smoother. And now we're trying to really refine the edge before we hone it. So we're starting to get pretty close with this edge with the 600 grit. So what I'm gonna do is, instead of doing 8 strokes per side, 10 strokes per side, I'm gonna start moving down to like 3 or 4 per side. Then we're gonna switch to the ceramic, and we should have this basically ready to go. So 2 or 3 strokes per side is probably all I'm gonna do. Switch it one more time, then we'll switch to ceramic. Okay. So we'll do that 2 strokes on each side one more time. We're gonna switch to the ceramic after that. That will be our last step. All right, So we're ready to switch to the ceramic. This is gonna be the smoothest process, exactly the same. The only time this process would change is if you're using a strop. So if you got the Elite version and you're using the leather strop, you won't go back and forth because that's how you cut your strop. Your strop would only run away from the edge, and so you would do one stroke, lift it, one stroke, lift it, one stroke, and so on. With the ceramic, you can still go back and forth. So we're gonna do probably only 3 or 4 passes per side a couple of times. Once I feel like it's sharp, we'll do 1 pass on each side, 3 or 4 times, and then this should be, this should be very sharp at that point. So here we go with the ceramic. And again, once you get to, like with all of the grits, but especially with the ceramic, this is where you want your pressure to be really, really light. If you're going too heavy on this, you're just gonna keep moving the burr back and forth no matter what you do. So at some point, you get your pressure light enough. That's how you get rid of the burr entirely, and you get your edge left to where it's just a sharp edge. All right, we're gonna do that one more time on each side. And I believe we have a sharpened edge. Hopefully, otherwise this is gonna be embarrassing. I'm gonna stand up, it's a little windy. Oh yeah. And we were able to get that chip completely out of this edge. So the paper test is always a good test for sharpening. One of the great ways to test an edge is to cut through paper. One thing that most people do when they test their edge out on paper is they just cut through the paper, and they end up testing only about this much of their edge. That's not the point of the paper test. As you're cutting through the paper, you should be moving the entire edge through the paper. The whole thing you're trying to do there is see if your edge stops or catches anywhere and either tears or doesn't cut as clean. That would be a good indication that you miss a spot or that there's a spot that's not quite as sharp. Another thing that I like to do is I'll run my fingernail down the edge, and if it feels smooth all the way down, then I probably didn't miss any spots. And this does feel pretty smooth all the way down. So even with an edge that was pretty messed up to begin with, this thing in 30 minutes or so was able to bring it back to sharp enough to cut paper easily. And we even reprofiled this edge a little bit. The initial edge was a little bit steeper than 25 degrees. We were pushing probably 23, 22 degrees. And so we were able to fix the edge, reprofile it, and get it sharp, all with this. So, check it out, Work Sharp. It is again, it's the Precision Adjust knife sharpener. My recommendation is, if you have the extra cash, get the Elite version. You're gonna have more grits, you're gonna have a strop, and it comes with a cool kind of nylon case that it all fits in, makes it easier to pack around. Great tool, and yeah, it worked out great. So thanks as always for watching these videos. We appreciate it. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something about sharpening your knives. Let us know what you want to see next. What Work Sharp tool do you want to see next? What knife do you want to see us sharpen next? We've already sharpened a tracker, some of our kitchen knives. We've gone through some different scenarios here, but let us know what else you want to see, and we'll see if we can make it happen. Thanks, everybody.